And my name is Ulrike Guérot. It's my pleasure to lead you through the second day of conference, the second morning of conference. And in difference to yesterday's session, which were more about political thought and more theory, we are going to look at three countries today. One, and the first is Eastern Europe, or not country, but Eastern Europe and Russia. The second will be Israel, the Israel party system, and the third will be Germany. And we will try to bring together this with the questions of yesterday, which is democracy. But it seems to be more case study today than yesterday, where we were in the realm of theory. So the first speaker here, and I'm very happy to announce him to you, is Karl Schlögel. Who is a German distinguished professor who studied Eastern European history, philosophy, sociology, who did numerous works about Eastern Europe, who was a professor first in Konstanz, which is the southern part of Germany, and then in Viadrina, Frankfurt an der Oder, which is a very important project in the German academic community because it's that Polish-German university which was built at the border after '89. He had numerous research fellowships in Anthony's College in Oxford or at the Swedish Collegium for Social Science, and a huge list of awards that he has been awarded, not only for science, but also for essayistic prosa work, but also for basically work in the actual field of policy making, which is working against, working for centers for refugees. For instance, he holds the Franz Werfel Menschenrechtspreis des Zentrums gegen Vertreibung and the Bundesverdienstkreuz. So I think Karl Schlögel in a very, very prominent way combines pure academic research with a real impact on policy and on making sort of history alive for people working on memories and cross memories. And if I had to say a more personal word, rather than reading you the whole list of achievements in his life, I guess you as academics, you also have in all topics your sort of persons you read when you want to know something. Sort of you go to Stieglitz if you want to know something for global economy. If you want, as a German, you know something about Russia and Eastern Europe, you go Karl Schlögel. It's basically the first name that pops up in your mind when you really want to know something, be it on Ukraine or Poland or Russia and all of this. And what I like most, if you ever want to discuss his work, is that he has a warm writing. It's not only sort of history and theory and what has happened, but there's a very warm and real-life access to what people have been living through and doing in these countries. So again, it's my huge pleasure to announce Karl Schlögel to you, who will talk about the great temptation, third-way thinking in pre-war Eastern Europe and today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for this kind introduction. Thank you for bringing me to Israel, to Jerusalem, which is always a place I have the impression that where you are confronted with realities, and I have the impression that this is a good school for getting into realities and to cope with the contradictions of reality. I have prepared a paper, The Great Temptation, Third Way Thinking in Pre-War Eastern Europe and Today, but I would like to leave it aside and to try to do it more in a kind of meditation, what I want to say to you. When I got this invitation, I thought about the new terminology about democracy in Eastern Europe and in Russia, sovereign democracy, illiberal democracy, etc. And I was tempted to look around where is there a history of ideas connecting these new terminology on democracy with the history. And I was looking into the pre-war time, in the interwar time of Eastern Europe, and I found some authors like Ivan Ilyin, Nikolai Berdyaev, some people, Nikolai Trubetskoy from the Eurasian intellectual group, And I started to write about these. But finally, I found out that the real links between today's discourse on democracy in Eastern Europe that the links are very superficial and not really very important. I will so touch the Berdyaev, Ilyin, and others, but the thing I want to talk about is on different things. The second why I changed my schedule here is I want to mention that I belong to maybe in this circle to old-fashioned thinking people who believe that up to now we have no better guarantee for keeping societies together than the nation state. The nation state, for me, is still an existing reality, and organizing the organized form of community life. And the same is, I believe, and I have written about borders. I think borders are essential for defining territories and the territory of communities. And the third thing, in my view, after having listened to yesterday's talks, which are very important for me to open up the field for rethinking all things, is that, in my view, there is really, it's possible to make a difference between elections as a fake and elections in reality. I mean, what happened in 1989, there have been situations where elections were impossible, and there was a situation where elections changed a lot. But I'm a realist also to know that elections don't change societies, that elections don't reconstruct entire new lives. That's quite clear. But so this for the background and to relating to some topics which have been raised yesterday. In the last years, there's, if you read the headlines of newspapers, there's always talk about Eastern Europe is drifting away towards authoritarianism, backsliding to totalitarianism, or the Economist is asking what has gone wrong with democracy. In my view, and this is first of all my personal, is probably it could be that our perception of what was going on after '89 was wrong, and not only what is going wrong in Eastern Europe. I have, and I belong to this generation with two great events, '68 and '89. And '89, it was a moment which was, I was waiting for this moment, but it came unexpectedly for me and for many of my colleagues in my generation. We thought that after '89, that all things will be very hard. The process of transformation will be very complicated with a lot of hardships. But there was a kind of confidence and a horizon of expectations, to use the term of Reinhard Koselleck, that everything somehow will be okay. We knew that it was impossible to reconstruct a new society in 2 or 3 or 4 years. It's impossible. But we had the feeling that after this great divide, East-West, US, Soviet Union, capitalism, socialism, democracy, dictatorship, that after overcoming this great divide in Europe, something new will emerge from the ruins of the post-war world. And this confidence and expectation was, I would say, a shared feeling of the post-89 generation. And now history did turns we did not expect. Nobody could expect in 2001 the attacks on the World Trade Towers, the burning of these skyscrapers. Nobody did expect that in 2008 the crash of Lehman Brothers and the global financial crisis. And nobody, or only few people, could imagine that in the centers of European metropolises would explode suicide bombers or terrorist attacks. And not only in Europe. I mean, there have been much more bombings in the metro, for instance, in Moscow and in Madrid and in other places. So what I want to say is that these expectations we had in a feeling of overcoming the post-war divide of Europe, these feelings were wrong. And we had to learn that history is doing its own ways. And we have to realize that history is going its own ways. And we are not the masters of history, but we have to learn what is going on. And insofar, the discussion about disillusionment in the last years, in my view, is a moment of enlightenment. We learn what is going on. We are going to say farewell to some expectations we had, but which did not were not realized. So the third way idea came on the ground of overcoming the desire to overcome the split and the divide, and to bring together best practices of both sides. And in this regard, I think that there are some analogies to the spiritual situation in the interwar time, in the sense that there was a thinking that after the collapse of the great empires, Europe could be reconstructed, taking the best elements from both sides. And I'm talking about people like Nikolai Berdyaev, who was exiled forcibly from Russia in 1921, like Ivan Ilyin. They came to Berlin, and they had a privileged position in comparing what's going on in East and West. They have been the eyewitnesses of the Red dictatorship, of communism. They had in mind and before their eyes the rise of Mussolini's fascism, and they became the eyewitnesses and, in fact, the victims in many ways of the rise of the Nazi movement in Germany. And the idea of, especially of Nikolai Berdyaev, was that after the collapse of the empire, it's not only a crisis of one single state. He believed that there is a crisis going on in failing states in general, and that something new has to be created and something new has to be expected. And he was thinking about non-state organizations, corporations, and especially a new role of religion and political organism, which is beyond and overarching partisanship of the traditional party system. And he had in view that Europe should go away between these, what he later on called totalitarian threat for Europe. When I refer to Berdyaev and Ilyin, this is because today we have a discourse going on referring to these philosophers. But I think the real understanding of the sovereign democracy, illiberal democracy, is not coming from understanding the philosophers of the 20s, despite the fact that Ivan Ilyin, so is the saying, is the favorite philosopher of Vladimir Putin. I think we have to understand the production of ideology which is going on now in Eastern Europe and in Russia, not the tradition of the 20s, but we have to look in the social fabric of today's Russia and today Hungary and Poland. I think the situation in the interwar time was entirely different from today. So I also do not believe to the idea of path dependency, that there's a kind of fate to reiterate the old history, that there's a kind of even a teleology of failing, that Poland is going to fail, Hungary is failing. I think we have to analyze again the given situation, which is entirely new, and I would warn to look to analogies, because analogies in most cases are traps, and how is it called?
Auf Deutsch.
Die Falle, the trap. The traps. Eine Falle. Analogies can help to sharpen your eye, your mind, your analytical capacity, but in general, there are no identical situations in history. There is no ewige Wiederkehr des Immergleichen. There is no reiteration, but any situation is new. And the difference in the pre-war situation, as you know, is it was the falling apart of empires. All these new states in between had to be reconstructed, some for the first time. I mean, Czechoslovakia, the Baltic states, all these states, or most of them, did not exist before 1918 or before the Paris Peace conferences. They had a very complicated process of state building and nation building to construct infrastructure and the basic elements of state sovereignty. And there have been events which did disturb this process, this organic process of construction of state and nation. And I have in mind especially Black Friday 29, which was a huge event, a caesura for East Central Europe, and giving strong impulses for establishing authoritarian regimes, not only in Poland, but in the Baltic states and in others. The only state which kept somehow stable and not changing into an authoritarian regime was, as you know, Czechoslovakia. Now to the discussion today about sovereign democracy. I mean, there are some theoreticians and ideologues, very fascinating persons, I have to say, like Vladislav Surkov, fascinating person, relatively young, with an amazing career out of the 80s, perestroika, going into business with Khodorkovsky, then going into the administration, and now very close to the Putin think tanks and spin doctor organizations. Or a person like Gleb Pavlovsky, who came out of the dissident movement. I knew him from the early 80s in the dissident circles in Moscow. Or Alexander Dugin, a personality who is fluent in many languages, is translating almost all of the philosophers of the conservative revolution, the conservative revolution, and of the European right and extreme right, from Carl Schmitt, Haushofer. So there's a very active transfer of ideas. And I would say that people like Surkov and Pavlovsky, they are, we have not yet taken up the challenge to cope, to take up the challenge of the ideological and philosophical discourse with these people. And it's not only propaganda we have to fight today, it's a kind of postmodern mix of facts and fiction. It's not old style Soviet propaganda, it's something new. And I would say one of the deficiencies of the European intellectual community is up to now that they did not realize how serious this challenge is. Concerning the sovereign democracy of Pavlovsky and Vladislav Surkov, which is, by the way, one of the most brilliant postmodern writers in Russia, he is saying that democracy is not only democracy as such, but democracy which is used for undermining the sovereignty of Russia he's criticizing the general concept of democracy, and only the link between sovereignty and democracy is what he is propagating. For instance, if NGOs are using democracy for propagating their ideas, this can interpreted as undermining the sovereignty of the Russian Federation. Or if you support the interests of ethnic minorities, and he's referring, for instance, to the Finno-Ugric minorities supported by Scandinavia, by Finland, this is attack on the sovereignty of Russia. And in this case, the values of democracy should be limited, restricted. Another interpretation of a new type of democracy, of course, is Dugin's Eurasian way of democracy. And the basis for this new democracy is the specific place of Russia in between it's not East, it's not West, it's not Europe, it's not Asia, but it's a society or civilization sui generis. And this sui generis argument is in a way legitimating the limitations and the restrictions of liberal democracy as we or the West understand them. But I think the main field of analysis for us should not be this kind of history of ideas, but to understand how machinery of making the system working is how the system is functioning. And I have to say that I have problems with models because Russia has a constitution. Russia has, and almost all these countries in the interwar period, they had constitutions following the French or the American example. But the reality of working of the system have nothing to do with the model or the constitution. And in this regard, I would say that it's more important to understand how the integration and the mobilization of the society in the Russian Federation is organized, and it has less to do with the institutions and the models. It has, in this moment, after the devaluation and after the, in many ways, not the destruction, but just not the functioning of the institutions and the check and balances of the institutions. It's the way of integrating through an ideological mobilization through a new type of propaganda. And the main narrative, in my view, is that Russia is in the center of global aggression, that Russia has to be defended, and that anything which is going on in the world is an expression of Russophobia or and this is the main energy to integrate the nation. And Lev Gudkov, I would say one of the leading sociologists in Russia today, he is using the term of negative integration, the negative integration, which is not based on a positive program on remaking the Russian Federation, of second modernization, to concentrate and to focus all energy in remaking the country after 100 years of a very hard and exhausting history, but it's only a negative program, and the whole energy to bring together this very fragmented and disparate societies to find a common enemy. And the search and the construction of the enemy is the main thing in propaganda. And insofar, I'm convinced that Putin's policy of negative integration is a failing concept. It is working in the moment. It's working maybe for a certain time. But in my view, he's a failing man because he has no program for Russia after the bonanza of oil and gas. And yeah, in my view, he is, despite his successes in diplomacy, in bringing back Russia to the Mediterranean Sea, etc., he's a failing man in the medium and in the long term. In difference to historians, in difference to prophets and in difference to Cassandra, they know how future will be. The prophets know how the future will be, and Cassandra, of course, she knows also, because she knows all about apocalypse and apocalyptic scenarios. We do not know what will happen. We do not know even what will happen tomorrow. And it's the same situation as in the pre-9/11 days, in the pre-coming down of the Berlin Wall days, and in the pre-Lehman Brothers coming down days. We do not know what will happen tomorrow. And insofar, we do not know. But I would like to conclude with the following. There's a kind of European, fatigue, European fatigue and European skepticism. And we do not talk about what is going on the ground in some places. And for instance, I was amazed that one of the great events in the last decade, this was Ukraine. I mean, we are talking mostly about Ukraine as a failing or semi-failing state, which is not true. This is a great event, it's a great movement, it's the struggling of a society to find a new form, to reorganize, to find a way, I would not say pure democratic, but to find a way where people can have a normal life and can do what they want in their country. So it was the most important mass movement and ongoing struggle against power and the oligarchs, etc. So I would say events like Ukraine are as important as, you may say, Podemos or I'm in this moment living in Bavaria. I did not expect that the Bavarian society would be able to accept this large number of refugees. It was entirely unexpected for me that this potential in the German society, which is well established and ordinary, etc., that they will react to this extraordinary challenge. So sometimes I have the feeling we underestimate the potentials Europe has, and that we are focusing our view only on the process of disintegration, of falling apart, of disintegration. And the situation is, I do not neglect this, is very serious. And I even think that in this case, Russia plays a very important role in disintegrating Europe. This new international of the right and the left, Marine Le Pen, Jobbik, the right-wing people in Germany, the instrumentalization of the Russian-speaking minority in Russia, and we have about many 100,000 people with Russian passports in Germany. These are, and the use of the internal contradictions in Europe and between the United States and Europe, this could help deteriorate and disintegrate and fragmentate Europe. So I think I'm fully aware of the risks and the dangers, but I would like to address more intellectual energy on the forces who can find a way out of the crisis. Yeah, thank you very much. I apologize for this more improvised meditation, for this meditation.
I think we were happy to have a meditative moment about perhaps what we are getting wrong in analyzing Russia, and that we have been a little bit intellectually lazy and not capturing their discourse, as suggests Mr. Schlögel, that we are perhaps also a little bit too aggressive with Russia. That is what perhaps is the subtext of what you are suggesting, but I do not want to dominate, so I'm opening the floor for your questions. 1, 2.
How do you answer, that's a very simplistic question, how do you answer the simple way of viewing Russia and Turkey as two cases of efforts by Putin to become a neo-Tsarist and by Erdogan to become a neo-Pasha, whatever. Actually, an effort of returning to things that did exist in the past. It's a provocative question, but...
let me take 2 or 3 or 4 questions, because there are many in the room. So behind you, please, and then we take the first 4.
I would actually like to hear the answer to this, because my question is based on what he has asked. So maybe you can answer his question.
Mr. Schlögel will certainly, but before there's a third question from your...
Thank you. I wanted, in part, relating to what this ambiguous situation of how the Russian neo-right or the usage of this conservative revolution ideology and their fomenting of kind of alliance of extreme right parties, how basically it's enabled by the what I call false respectability, to which especially salient in liberal conservative Europe, which could provide an alternative to this swing to the right. Because when this liberal conservative side is basically afraid of challenging reality about economic problems, refugees and others, this agenda goes to the more extreme right. So that's, I think, and then the whole elite liberal milieu lives in a world of fantasy, for example, in which Europe is aggressive to Russia, too aggressive. Everyone who knows European policy would laugh at this statement.
The fourth question goes there.
Well, I'm also very grateful for your meditation, which I think the basic message is to realize that we should not be bound with habitual ways of thinking in view of the situations that have developed in the last 25 years. I'd like to make 3 brief points. The first is that in your meditation, I think there's partly a rediscovery of things that you find already in Aristotle's Politics. Aristotle, having studied over 100 constitutions of Greek states, makes various points. One is that the formal constitution and the actually working constitution of a state may be very different. He already sees this and gives examples. And the second point he makes is that the form of a state, whether it's monarchic or oligarchical or democratic, may be less important in practice than whether the rule of law exists in the state. That is, whether whoever is ruling the state does so according to established laws or without, or in a manner of arbitrary rule. So this is the first point. The second point is, I would say that what we're seeing today is not only is actually a disappearance of what you might call the first and second ways. In many places in Europe, the former centre-right is being replaced by nationalist parties, and the former centre-left is being replaced by other kinds of utopian parties, as for example in Greece and in Spain. And I would say the third point is the following, that there was somebody who wrote, after '89 about the end of history. What it seems to me is what we're seeing is actually a regression of history. We seem to be going backwards in history. I mean, the ideologies of the 20th century have been discredited. The colonial era has been abolished, and what we had before the colonial era now seems to emerge, because one of the things that the colonial era did was to neutralize Islam as a political force. First of all, in the various colonies, and secondly, in Turkey and Iran, in the middle of the 20th century, you had regimes which themselves tried to abolish Islam, and that is going back. We are back now, as it were, to the time when the eastern and southern Mediterranean were controlled by militant Islam, and as opposed to the northern Mediterranean, where you have a variety of Christian states. And by the way, the last remark, the reasons why Christian Europe failed or succeeded against Islam had a great deal to do with whether these European states united or fought among themselves, such as the wars between England and France is one of the things that undermined the Crusades.
Okay, last question and sixth question over there. Two other questions.
I can wait until the next...
No, there will be no next round. We need to stop at 11 to be sort of in time with a certain delay.
Okay, I think, first of all, thank you. This was an illuminating analysis of Eastern Europe. But I really think that the bind in which democracy and Eastern Europe find themselves is a very important aspect of the climate today. The dream of bringing wealth and democracy failed in America. We know how disappointed and how disenchanted are the Americans about the capacity to maintain equality, freedom, wealth, and democracy, and we see a litany of criticism, profound criticism, not only of the economic inequality and the crisis of American democracy, the deadlock democracy during the time of the Bush the son, and the deadlock democracy during the time of Obama. There is a growing sense that democracy is in a state of failing system in many ways. At the same time, in Eastern Europe, the countries you describe have experienced the trauma of the total failure of the dream of communism and socialism. So what kind of positive forces, what kind of ideology can emerge from these fabrics of social fabrics when on the one hand you have the disenchantment with democracy, on the other hand disenchantment with socialism? What remains if not fear and power to cement societies?
Thank you very much. It was very convincing what you described about Eastern European situations. There are small two questions. What theoretically is meant with the sovereignty of Russia after the discourses of yesterday I'm interested in. The second, third, three, Poland has a force against authoritarian attitudes just now, more than at least I expected, as I heard from my friends, Polish friends. The third is, if it's so, what does it do to the international community, if so, to contain wars?
Okay, so a panopticum of questions, please.
Yeah, thank you for all these questions. I, of course, cannot answer sufficiently. War, to start with the last. I think we have to be prepared for all situations. And the idea that power is not longer military power does not work, that only discourse and diplomacy are functioning, I do not believe. And some people use and understand totally that Europe is unable to defend itself and to use military power. And the other side, who knows this, of course, has a lot advantages in dealing and making politics. And I would say that the project of a European Union or Europe in the future without the concept of self-defense is useless. It has somehow to be discussed. What is the ideology after the falling apart of the Soviet Empire? I would say, and we did not discuss this, for instance, yesterday, the main things in the 90s was not democracy. I mean, Russia was not in democracy. It had a democratic constitution, but it was chaos. There was not a reform, or it was the freedom based on chaos, the rivalry of oligarchs, etc. And this was a great chance for reinventing the forces of civil society. And the Putin narrative of the 90s, of course, is an entirely reactionary, because he ignores that the 90s, the open space of, yes, anarchic order, open spaces for the regeneration of the forces of the society. It was not only a destructive period, the 90s. This is very important. But I would say the great advantage of the 90s was to go away from politics and to leave behind ideologies. It was the opening of space of private life, of consumerism, and I would say, of course, there was a moment of corrupting people, because they left behind all political responsibility, the interest for building up institutions. This is right. But the great event and the great, the social process, the transformation of society was that individuals tried to make their own programs. Yeah? And in this sense, I never believed that the citizens of East European and Russia in the 90s were passive. Yeah, there was a narrative in the West that they are expecting everything from state, and that there's a kind of apathy. No, millions of people tried to reinvent their existence, the existence of their families, to create a new fundament economically, etc., etc. But this is, and it was a great activity. The main activity was to invent and to create a subsistence economy, yeah? And this is the basis for individual existence. So it was a very important moment. And a great advantage. I mean, Georgi Conrad in the late 80s was writing his book about anti-politics. Yeah, anti-politics means to get away from the political intervention of the state in your private life. So I would say the invention of the private sphere and consume. Consume had a revolutionary, not only a corrupting, a revolutionary impact, I would say. But it is obviously not enough. It's not enough, and the vacuum, of course, it's a huge vacuum, and this is desire for a political idea. This is the empire, the post-empire trauma, which is unbelievably great, and Putin's formulation of the greatest geopolitical catastrophe. There is something, there is truth in, yeah, and everybody who lived in the Soviet Union found itself on the next day in different countries. I mean, it's an unbelievable, harsh experience for this generation. So the desire for a new Russian idea was very great, and all the spin doctors in the 90s, around Yeltsin and others, they tried to create a new Russian identity. And Putin's idea is that Russia is getting up from the knees and resist to the other world power. But I have the feeling that it is mostly a negative identity, a negatively defined identity, because, yeah, there is no program for a second modernization. And I mean, I'm not a political analyst. My matrix for analysis is entirely different. I compare what Russia has done in the 20s. They have, up to now, this government has been unable to construct the highway between St. Petersburg and Moscow. It's up to now. I mean, I'm going to this and looking for. So basic challenges of rebuilding the infrastructure and modernization, others, there are a lot of indicators. I mean, people, 1.5 million middle class, well-educated people leaving Russia in the last 5 years. You can find them everywhere in all universities of the world because they don't see a chance to, and these are all very qualified, energetic people who want to reconstruct their country. Yeah, the idea of the Ruska idea of an empire, and to be back, but it's a compensatory idea. It's a compensation for, instead of modernization of the country. So Turkey and Russia, in my view, I perceive this Ottoman Empire and the Tsarist Empire always as parallel empires. And I have to say that I admired, I know that at the beginning of the modernization of Turkey is this genocide, yeah, of the post-Ottoman nation state, Turkey. But I had always the feeling that the Kemal way of modernization and secularization was in a certain way successful in comparison to the unbelievable victims and sufferings of the Soviet process of modernization, collectivization, industrialization, the Great Terror, etc. So I was believing that the process of secularization and modernization in Turkey was going well, and so I was surprised. I was surprised about the Putin, this revival of something different, and about Erdogan. I mean, I could 10 years ago I could not imagine that Erdogan now is behaving like authoritarian, not a sultan, but something different, a new type of sultan. But again, we should not forget that Putin is not Russia and Erdogan is not Turkey. They are on the top in the moment, and we should listen to what's going on the ground. And it's not only, I mean, the strike of the truck drivers in Russia, I mean, it will not save Russia, but everywhere in this country, in this huge fragmented country, there are initiatives outside of control of this one man in Moscow.
So, with this, after having read in a panopticon of so many things,